You are listening to a podcast series, Asking Soulful Questions, by Sacred Art of Living. To learn more, visit sacredartofliving.org. Today's podcast is a part of a series called The Question of Belief. Welcome back to our third and final episode on Whose God is Right with Victor and Nadya Gross. We hope you enjoy.
Well, it makes me think, Victor, thinking back to something you said, so much of what I see happening is, we all have these different names for God, or different, I think of God as so much more experiential than I do something that you can think about. But what I heard Victor say that I think really gets at the root of some of these things that tend to separate us is it's tied. Somehow these religions get tied to nationalism, as you said, and I think culture as well. So it's hard to separate out then what is really the issue here. You know, it might not be really what we call God, but it might be more like, hey, you're on the land that we really want, but we're going to wrap it in this kind of religious overtone so we can get our people on board.
Yeah, that's why they're using a term to describe what's going on politically. One of the forces and cultural forces in America, one of the negative ones, they call Christian nationalism. All right. And it's to make this land, as you put it, this land will be Christianized, as it always was. It's interesting how they phrase it because it never was. and when they are confronted with the most profound differentiation between this country's founding and the role of religion, Thomas Jefferson's letter to Virginia House, whatever it's called, they just say, well, that's not in the Constitution. They dismiss Jefferson, but everybody has developed this country with that understanding. So that's one part. I wanted to just say for me, I went to Reb Zalman once. I mean, this is very autobiographical. Zalman likes to say in writings and in his teachings that theology is the afterthought of a spiritual experience. Okay? So that means languaging what the spiritual experience was. So I went to him and I said, Reb Zalman, I have a problem. I said, for whatever reason, my rabbi, when I was in high school, introduced me to theology. And for several years, on a weekly basis, I learned particularly medieval Jewish theology. I said, and it was long before I ever had a true spiritual experience. Mm. And he put his hands on my shoulders, smiled his smile, and he said, you're screwed. All right. And it led me to realize that for a good part of my adult life, I was that expression, the God of the philosophers. That was my God. Mm. But that God didn't really serve me. Not as a person who fell in love with Nadya, not as a person who was present at 4 natural childbirths. That didn't work. Language didn't work. All right. And I went back to what Heschel said. Heschel said the beginning of a spiritual life is awe, wonder, and radical amazement that there is such a thing as creation. And I realized that I didn't have to name God. That was the output. All right. And to be able to identify in my life awe, wonder, and radical amazement. All right. And when we got to the Bay Area in the late 90s and reunited with my longtime friend, Michael Lerner, and he was inspired also a few years before I got to the seminary where Heschel was teaching. The same thing. That was the foundation of Michael Lerner's spirituality, was all wonder and radical amazement. And it's the foundation of what little remains of my optimism. Right? Because I still can go,
yeah.
All right.
It's wonderful. It's why we call this series Soul Size Questions, not Soul Size Answers. And, and maybe that's what takes a person to awe and wonder. And I don't know if is there something to the stereotype of the outsider to Judaism, sort of getting this impression that a question is asked and it's answered with another question. There seems to be an impression that we have, which was not the tradition I was raised with. If you asked a question, in a theology classroom, you were taught to go to the source and find some scholar back in the Middle Ages who gave you the definitive answer. And that is narrowing, right?
That was very Augustinian, right?
Exactly.
And yeah, I spent 7 years studying Talmud as part of my rabbinic education, but it was a majority of the studies. And that was a question, on the one hand and on the other hand. And you try to see, well, where in the middle exists truth? And, well, they weren't interested in that. They wanted you to understand on the one hand and on the other hand, arguments. And so, yes, we became, because of the Talmudic period, which still exists, but in its formation, it took 1,000 years. They really refined that skill, and then you look at the Socratic dialogues, and see, that's a minor experience of Socrates asking questions compared to what we brought into the world. It does explain why there is an awful lot of Jewish lawyers, because both on the humorous side, but on the serious side, law became the way to achieve justice. All right, and that old statement, I don't even know where it came from originally, that Christianity is the religion of love and Judaism is the religion of law, is absolutely wrong, because everything Jesus said about love, he was quoting his text, the Torah and the prophets. All right. So, but to achieve that, I'll just finish with this. One of the most profound thoughts that I heard from somebody was when they were debating the Civil Rights Bill of 1964. Somebody on TV interviewing Martin Luther King Jr. asked him this profound question. The question was, Dr. King, do you believe that the white man will come to love the black man? And King's answer was, I don't expect love. What I expect is justice. I go, whoa. That was when I never forget, that's when I decided he was a modern day prophet in the Israelite tradition. Right? He knew what was possible and necessary first. Love may come. Yeah.
Amazing. Boy, it's beautiful. I just appreciate this conversation. It feels like it could go on and on and on. And I guess in some ways, I hope that it does. And Victor, you've opened up another channel of conversation I want to have with you, because I spent years in Rome studying Thomas Aquinas' university, the Summa Theologica, which was based on Maimonides' approach. And Aquinas would ask a question, and he would give all the answers to the question. And then on the other page, he would say, sed contra. But on the other hand, there's all of this. And you were not left ultimately with an answer. And I thought, now you see already into the mainstream of medieval Catholicism came the influence of the sacred question, not the sacred answer. So
Yeah.
Well, and I would suggest that ultimately comes from a mystic source, because there are no answers to the mystery. It's all mystery, right? So what the access to the mystery is through the question. And the question is the journey. And the journey is what matters, because there is no destination. I mean, ultimately, I imagine in the Anam Cara tradition, our ultimate destiny is we're all going to die. And then who knows? We might discover the answers, or maybe it's only an opening to the next question. But while we're alive, it's about the journey, isn't it? And so the questions are what fuel the journey. And to assume that there's a definitive answer, you used that term before, you're looking for the definitive answer. That's like asking whose God is right, or who's got the true God. And I will edit what I said before. The God that's right is our God.
Yeah.
Right? It's the God of all. And and we can argue about God's name ad infinitum, ad nauseum. I don't care. We have a prayer in our tradition that's said all too many times and ends with, Bayom Hahu. And this, it's actually, where is it from, Victor? Tell me.
Zechariah.
Right. So the prophet Zechariah says, Bayom Hahu, in that day, which is speaking of the Messianic day, that God will be one and God's name one, right? And most people hear that as, that there will be one God, and that God will be the Yud He Vav He God, right? What I hear is God's name will be one. One. Right? Not that there'll be we'll discover which one name is the correct name, but the name will be one. Echad.
Yeah, it's, Victor, you keep stirring these things up in me with these stories, because what I keep thinking about as we're having this discussion is, and we've got all these ways that we try and describe this thing, and ultimately, at least in my mind, really what we hope for is that it inspires some kind of action, right? And so that's when you said about Reverend King saying justice. I mean, he was really out there putting his belief system into action, right? To try and make it a more just world. And I think we could have a whole long discussion about, okay, how do these different belief systems lead us to be better and kinder human beings, right?
And I think one of the famous King quotes is when he was asked and pushed about what he believed as a pastor, he said, "My religion is responsibility. My ability to take whatever I believe, doesn't matter. If I don't do something with it, if it doesn't become a more just, peaceful world, what is it? It's just words." And I think that's what God asks of us. I think it's in the prophetic tradition. It's universal. I just feel like, sincerely, I'm just so grateful for this relationship. I'm so grateful that we've taken the time to record this. And Daryl, I think maybe you agree that this has to be an opening for a next conversation and series.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, there's just so much that, there's so many wells you can go down when you start exploring these things. And, I think that's ultimately what, at least for me, and I think Richard would say, that we're hoping that this continues to do for everybody. It's like, oh man, I need to go reflect on that now. What did I just experience, and how is that impacting me?
I mean, all these things that take place, that come out for the good are primarily relationship. All right. I mean, it's not the argumentation. It's not looking at the other. It's such a great image, looking on the other side of the page to find out the answer. All right. And it's let me give you an example. In the first week that we entered into this physical relationship with the Lutheran Church in 2003, we didn't know where we stood regarding the Christian ministers. All right. So I walked into the office of Pastor Larry, who was this Nebraska farm son who grew up to be a Tillich theologian. And I walked in and I said, I wanted to find out where I stood in relationship to his beliefs. We haven't had a discussion. So I said, let me run this by you. If the Messiah comes again, and it's Jesus, then we Jews have been misled for almost 2,000 years. But if the Messiah comes and it's not Jesus, you guys have been misinformed at best. But if the Messiah comes and it's a Black woman who's also a lesbian, we win. And he went like this, bingo. And that established the relationship, because
awesome.
we could, I mean, you know, religionists take themselves too seriously, quite frankly. And the ability to laugh about ourselves in relationship with being a clergy person or being a religionist. All right. I mean, I quite frankly find fundamentalists far too serious. You know, I want to say, lighten up. You know.
Absolutely. So to be continued, Daryl. I think that might be the answer.
Yeah. You're right. It is endless. I mean, we got so many places we can go with. Because I was thinking, Nadya, you know, we were talking about the name of God or whatever, and I was thinking, you know, just the practice of gratitude. That is in my belief system, that's an experience of God, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
It's when you're in that space that you experience that.
Absolutely. And in our liturgical tradition, you know, that gratitude, which is what we awaken to, right? The first thing that we are meant to say, the first thing we utter when we find ourselves awake in the morning is thank you, right? We say, I'm so grateful to you, Holy One, to be in your presence, that you have returned my soul breath to me, right? How great is your faithfulness? That's our prayer in the morning. And that gratitude, then we notice all the blessings in our lives, and that gives rise to praise, right? When I see how blessed my life is, then I just want to praise, hallelujah, as often as I can. So you're right. That is precisely where we encounter that essence that we call God. Thank you for that, Daryl.
Thank you. And I am grateful for both of you. And Daryl, you can wrap it up for us, please.
Yeah. Okay.
That's beautiful. I just kind of want to go into a time alone to be grateful and in nature and to give thanks. That's what this inspires me to do. Thank you.
Well, thank you all. It's been a great experience, and I think everyone that listened or watched certainly had their view expanded. At least that's my hope. So we look forward to the next time we all get a chance to explore some new ideas on soul-sized questions. Thanks for joining.
We would like to thank you for tuning in to this episode of The Question of Belief. For more information about our entire podcast library, Asking Soulful Questions, visit our website at sacredartofliving.org.